Anthony, we can skip the fancy not my beat imaging. I don't think it actually does justice for our next guest because, as I told you via text message, Nora Princiotti, good friend and Ringer staff writer and podcast host.
Hello.
There's never been a phrase or anyone who has had more of like, this is my Super Bowl than you this week.
Thank you. I agree.
So Nora, obviously, as many of you remember her work for the Washington Times, writing about football. She hosts the Ringer NFL show. But she also hosts a podcast called Every Single Album, where you look at every single album that Taylor Swift has put out.
True.
And that has launched you into the Taylor Swift universe as a media person as well as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I've covered the NFL professionally for 8 years. I've covered Taylor Swift professionally for 4 years. I've been, deeply interested in her for much longer than that. But the fact that the two have collided is so not anything I ever assumed would happen, particularly not in this way.
Yes. Like, she's doing Super Bowl halftime. Like, that would be the collision. But no, she is featured on every single broadcast because she's dating one of the best players in the league and is now seeing her fan base mixed with the NFL fan base. That wasn't on the
bingo card?
On the docket.
Yeah. No.
But so I think the best use of our time in terms of a conversation about where all these things intersect is about fandom, because the intensity of fandom in the NFL is as intense as any sport in the world, and is large. Because, like, obviously there are very intense fans of any sport, any team, whatever, but, like, the number of very intense NFL fans, extremely high. Taylor Swift is as popular as any pop star, not only in the world now, but as any pop star basically in the world ever. When you think about, like, hardcore NFL fan, hardcore Taylor Swift fan, what are the similarities? Like, what drives that?
I mean, the similarities are that it's this intensely felt thing, and it's very personal to people. I mean, Taylor Swift is this woman who has, over the course of her career, like, she's made this legacy of kind of like writing the interior lives of her fans into song. And, I try to be sort of like a reasoned and sober fan, but on some level we all feel like she's speaking directly to us. And so it's this relationship with someone who, like, I've never met her. I probably never will meet her. And most people are in that position, even if they love her. And there's a thing with rooting for a sports team where it's like you're so separate from it, but it feels like a part of you. And that disconnect, it's often at the root of, like, the best parts of fandom and the worst parts of fandom. Yes. Where we get way too carried away, or when we get carried away in a way that's just sort of like magical and you get to put yourself into something that's not actually a part of you.
You find yourself crying because your team wins and all you did was watch on TV.
Right. And it's cathartic and it's emotional and it's meaningful and it forms bonds between people. I mean, the most fun part of this season for me has just been talking to other people about it. Just been talking to people who are enjoying, maybe they're enjoying tuning into a 3.5-hour football broadcast, but also, like, maybe they're just liking the memes. And that's fine because we're all sort of connected in this thing. And, like, I love football as a game. I love the X's and O's. I think it's a beautiful game. I think it's fascinating and complicated. But football is important to me because it is culture. And Taylor Swift is also important to me because she is culture. And the things that, like, connect us as people and that sort of connective tissue of life, I just think it's really, really interesting. And having it merge like this puts together more different swaths of humanity, right, than just doing one by itself or just doing the other by itself.
I think another thing that just hit me really hard as you were answering that question, and I think about kind of how I was taught to do this job, is can you create, like, heroes and villains, right? And as a storyteller, there's, like, a heroes and villains element, and the reason it works so well in sports is because it's so clear. Like, there is not a gray area. Like, there's two teams, they're playing, there's a scoreboard, and one wins and one loses, and if you wear burgundy and gold, you hate that blue team from Dallas with all your heart and soul. Right. And even if you're rooting for laundry or, the players change and, Dan Quinn was the Dallas defensive coordinator. Now he's the Commanders head coach. I hate that guy. Now I love him because he's mine. Like, there is that clear heroes and villains. And I think when you listen to the way that Taylor writes, I think she's actually, that might be, like, one of the superpowers, is because of the way she tells the stories in her songs, often many of her own. Like, Are they more complicated in real life? Maybe, but the way she writes it, I feel like, is very clear, like hero and villain, to the point that anti-hero, like that whole sentiment, like she kind of even flips it on its head.
Right. Well, she's really, I mean, I think the story of her public persona more than her like career as a musician and an artist, but it's one of choosing foils. And the idea of Taylor Swift as underdog has been a very complicated one throughout the years, because she came up in a country music ecosystem that had close to no history of accepting someone that young who was also female. And sort of clawing her way into Nashville was genuinely deft and difficult. And there was a lot of her early career where that was sort of the story of like, oh my gosh, there's this like supernova kid who's doing, who's taking on like big, bad, masculine Nashville, which like that's sort of the country music identity within the music industry. Then she got more famous and she started to become a little bit more of a true pop star. And it got complicated because she was still sort of writing these underdog stories, and she's cheer captain and I'm on the bleachers. And I think for a lot of people who were sort of in it from the beginning, and also for whom the songs really resonated, it made a lot of sense. To some people who were a little bit more on the outside of it, she was becoming rich and famous beyond her or anyone's wildest dreams. She was dating some of the most famous men in the world. And the idea that like a high school bully was sort of was like taking her on, just
right.
Started to get a little bit incongruent with how people saw her, which I think, we don't have to get into it, but like when the Kanye West VMAs incident happened, that was why to me, that was why that was such a lightning rod, is because you had a lot of people who were like, who the heck is she kidding? Like, she's a victim of this, and she's like so surprised, even though that's the umpteenth award she's won this year. And then you had all the fans who were like, no, that's me up there. Like, right. I see myself being sort of attacked. And so there's just sort of this fundamental disconnect. To bring it back around, I think as she's gotten older, and particularly as she's gotten engaged in some of the business dynamics of the music industry and really taking that on, I think she's gotten very smart about choosing who the foil is. Because when she's misstepped, I think it's been underestimating her own power and sort of coming off as punching down because she hasn't embodied the place that she's in. I think right now in this era of Taylor Swift, she's done a really good job of sort of like understanding the power that she wields. So in that sense, like, the hero, villain, anti-hero, favorite underdog dynamic that is so core to sports, it is really, really core to her story as an artist, definitely, but especially as someone who we just like consume in public as a celebrity.
Nora Princiotti is our guest here on the Hoffman Show. The podcasts, the NFL or the Ringer NFL show, and every single album, no matter which one, which side of this conversation interests you more, she has a podcast for you.
I do.
It's actually interesting to hear you describe that, though, because, and I'm not just saying this because like she's now associated with the Chiefs because of Travis, but like the Chiefs are the latest example of seeing that same arc. Like, they're the underdog story, right? They're led by Andy Reid, chronic underachiever in Philadelphia, Patrick Mahomes, who everyone knew was like ridiculously talented, but he wasn't the number one overall pick. It's like, can this Texas Tech fling it kid put it together? Travis Kelce, third round pick, and like they kind of put it together. Underdogs, everybody loves them. They're going up against Brady to start, and now they got to the point where I feel like we are, especially if they win on Sunday, we are at a mega tipping point with the Chiefs where everyone kind of hates them now. And all they've done is continue to be them.
Do you think they will, though? Like, that's a huge question to me because they're not
I feel like it's already happening. See, I agree with you, but because the way fandom is so emotional and it's not rational, I already sense that it's happening. Like, people around here in this zoo of media dorks that we all are, like, people are picking the Chiefs. But the narrative around Kansas City is now like, oh, they're spoiled or they're this. And all they've done is continue to do the same exact things they've done the whole time.
I find that so slippery, though, because what is it like? why are they spoiled? You know, with the Patriots, it was so easy. It was Spygate. It was Deflategate. They're cheaters. They hate each other. Brady's like this, you know, becoming this woo-woo guy who doesn't want you to eat strawberries. And Bill Belichick has never smiled. It's really, Andy Reid is like, here's my cheeseburger recipe.
Right.
And Patrick Mahomes is like, I have a goofy voice and I never say anything.
Right,
Like,
but I think it's, you know, they get the commercials and it's the fame and, you know, they get a bad call in whatever game that was and Mahomes like loses his mind.
Right.
And, you know, all those things that were admirable about his competitiveness and, you know, all that stuff. And also, part of it is just the heroes and villains. Like, they've made their rounds of the NFL kicking everyone else's ass. And, like, when the bully has beaten you up enough times, you're like, hey, I don't like that guy anymore.
Right. I think you're spot on in terms of the dynamic. To me, it is just a really open question which one of those things happens. Because if they win this game, I think that they are chasing Brady and the Patriots and literally no one else. And, you know, when we talk about the Josh Allen Bills or the Joe Burrow Bengals, it's not sort of like, is there a 1B to this era? It's like we sort of understand that everybody is second fiddle.
Yeah, it's the 96 Bulls.
Right. It's Jordan, or it's to some extent, you know, Brady and the Patriots with a who's going to be the Giants of this era thrown in. And I think that's very true. And if that does happen, I will be very curious to see if, like, league-wide, people find something to latch onto to hate them with, because I just don't know what it like. They're
Well, I mean, the
just
part
so
of it
goofy.
too is like, and not to be like the sports radio guy who's like, well, my mom, but like, my mom is a football fan, and like, she is one of these people that is just like, I want to see someone else win, and like, there's part of that too. This idea that like we want to spread the wealth, which is hilarious because I think if we're in the business, which we are, we know that's actually not true. Like, greatness drives ratings and interest. And, you know, yes, if Steph Curry and LeBron are playing in the 6th straight NBA finals, eventually there is something new. But I do think part of it is just like people feel bad for Josh Allen. Like, people feel bad for Joe Burrow. People feel bad and want to see someone else win. And so it's funny because, like, the Niners have been the best team in the NFC the last, 6 years, if you take the aggregate. But they are now seen as like, oh, this underdog, go get him. Kyle Shanahan, you underdog you, because of who they're facing.
Right. I will say I was very happy to hear Mahomes this week. He got some sort of underdog question. He was just like, I don't really ever think that I'm the underdog, which to me is so refreshing. Because even those, like, I mean, I covered some of those Patriots teams, and they were so good at twisting themselves in knots, being like, everybody's counting us out. I mean, they did it, you know, look, maybe they knew something that everybody didn't because they went on to lose the game. But the Eagles Super Bowl, Tom Brady's going up against Nick Foles.
Right.
And they were just that entire week, they were like, nobody believes in us. We're the underdogs. It is such an athlete talent. So I do have to hand it to Mahomes for flipping that on its head a little bit in the middle of the week and just saying, like, I sort of think I'm going to win most games.
Who do you think is going to win the game?
I do, the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah.
I feel like that is I need to come up with a new phrase because I just feel like I'm saying the same thing to every guest now. But it does feel like the sliding sentiment of the week is everyone's just like, oh, no, we bet against them with Buffalo. We bet against them with Baltimore. And we can't possibly be stupid enough to do that again.
I mean, that's me, because I really owed Chiefs fans an apology, because late in the year, I was so out on them. I mean,
after what happened to them in Baltimore, like, I mean, sorry, not in Baltimore. After what happened to them on Christmas Day, same day against the Raiders, like, makes sense.
Yeah, and it just, you know, statistically, there was something that really ended up being compelling to me, which was just that through the end of December, if you looked at the numbers, Mahomes throwing to running backs and tight ends was still Mahomes. You know, was a top 3 quarterback. Mahomes throwing to wide receivers was like statistically equivalent to Mac Jones. And I was just
a phrase, by the way, you never want to hear about yourself.
You never want to hear it. You just never, ever, ever want to hear statistically equivalent to Mac Jones. It's very bad. And I just went, you can't win a Super Bowl like that. I'm sorry. It's not possible. I'm done. Like, I'm not going to do the thing that I did at the beginning of the season where I picked Kansas City until someone proves otherwise. This is actually the thing that turns that around. And then they're in the friggin' Super Bowl. So right. I'm just like, all right.
Of course. I think there was a stat, whatever the last game that MVS dropped the ball, was it Packers maybe? that they had, the no-call PI situation.
Yes.
I think it was after that game. That was the fourth time that a game-winning pass or potential game-winning pass had hit a receiver in the hands and fallen to the turf.
Yeah.
Which is just bananas. And you're literally just going, if literally their wide receivers, receiver is in the name, could catch the football, this would be one of the best teams in the NFL. And fortunately for them, like, Rashee Rice has learned how to catch, and MVS makes a huge catch in one of the playoff games. Like, it really, for all of the problems that it seemed like they had, it really kind of came down to the fact that their receivers couldn't catch the ball, and now suddenly they are.
Well, and also in the fact that they had continued to try to incorporate those guys, right? Where pretty late in the year, and they'd had the issues, they still, Kadarius Toney was getting some meaningful snaps, and Mecole Hardman was getting carries near the goal line, and it wasn't working out. I'm just going like, geez, like if these players have to be getting the ball in high leverage situations, I don't trust this team. What they've done, which it's sort of in hindsight seems so obvious, but in the moment it seems like, well, you can't get away with that. They've eliminated those players from the offense.
Right.
It's Travis Kelce, it's Rashee Rice, it's Isaiah Pacheco, it's Mahomes scrambling, and that's what we do.
Yeah, I mean,
that's it.
By the way, what a wacky bit that Eric Bieniemy was in the locker room the other day.
Yeah.
That's tampering. He was under contract with the Commanders.
Well, but so I saw a story in the Washington Post, I think that published even just a couple hours ago, that allegedly they gave him permission.
Okay, that would make a lot of sense. I know Nikki was working on that.
Yeah. So I think that went up this afternoon, and it did. It's funny because it wasn't.
I guess EB wasn't super confident he was getting the head coaching job.
Well, so that's what she wrote in the story, and there wasn't sourcing attributed to it. So I wonder exactly where that information is coming from. Although,
we're not second guessing Nikki.
Yeah, this is just sort of like journalism hat on.
Yeah.
But it was that once it was sort of clear that he wasn't getting a job and that he was going to be on his way out there, they granted him permission to do it. That is interesting, just because the job stuff was not wrapped up by then.
No.
But to me, that indicates that they knew what was going on with him close to 2 weeks ago, which is just a little bit of an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah, there's it's a coaching search that had way too many wrinkles. I'll put it that way. Enough wrinkles for us all. Nora Princiotti, what are you working on for, are you writing something this week? Are you just doing pods? What's your week look like?
Yeah, so I have a story just sort of about how Taylor has influenced the NFL ecosystem that's up on theringer.com now. And tons of pods. I did the Press Box pod with Brian Curtis today. Ringer NFL
Brian,
show,
who was
as
on
always.
the show earlier today.
No way.
Yeah, Brian Curtis, a longtime friend. Good dude.
Brian Curtis, excellent people.
Yes.
And I'm surprised to hear you say that, even though, well, I'm not actually, but noted Cowboys fan, Brian Curtis.
No, he says it every time he's on the show. I'm like, Brian, are you trying to make the audience hate you? What are you doing?
That's sort of impossible. He's like the nicest guy ever.
I know.
But theringer.com, every single album, The Ringer NFL show,
Bang,
Radio
bang.
Row.
There you go. That's Nora Princiotti.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.